Hey guys, this is Jason, and I wanted to kind of explain a concept that I've recently run into with Angular that I think some other people have too, and they're just not really sure how to correctly handle it. And that is when you need an Angular application to go off to a server, grab some data, and then use that data, manipulate it. That becomes a single source of authority. Lots of different controllers and Angular services might use that data. Um, it sounds simple, but how do you actually do it? So here's an example of kind of a project that I'm working on that does this, and kind of wanted to show you and just walk you through the steps of how it's done. So what I've got here is an Angular app. So here's a service, specifically a factory, and it's got a single method on it that you should focus on, which is just called getData. And does what it does is it creates a variable. It creates a user-defined function that I've called getData, and it says if that variable is nothing, then go ahead and go off and get some data. And as you may know, the get method always returns a promise. So there you go. So it goes off, gets the data, setting cache true, which means any additional call will just get the cached version. I have a transform request here, which is doing literally nothing. And the interesting thing about promises is you all know that you can chain a then method to a promise to then use the data that it received. But if you return something from a then method chained to something that returns a promise, it actually resolves that promise with whatever it is you return. And so this is basically saying if there is no promise, then create one. And once you've gotten the data, resolve the promise with the received data. And then at the end, it just returns the promise. So that any subsequent calls to get data will skip all of this because promise is defined and simply return the promise. And so you can then call that then off of that and use it just like anything else. So there's this service called API service, which does that. Now, what I've done is I have another service over here, which brings that in through dependency injection using Angular. And what I've done is I've created a private variable called data, and I'm returning a public method called getData, which, as you can see, simply returns that getData method. That's this one right here. So it's saying API service.getData, there's the then, and then it's setting data, again, this is that private data method here, to something that's being received from the server. Now this right here is setting this data variable to the authoritative source of data. This service now becomes that. So all of your getters and setters would be in here, and it would manipulate this data object. So then to actually use it inside of your router, you'll use the resolve. And so as an example, we'll go here. So what I'm saying is inject this particular kind of service and ignore this right here. This is specific to this application, so you can ignore these lines here. But you can see I'm bringing in that service, and I'm saying return the value of getData. And what this will do is whatever value you specify here allows you to inject that into the controller that you assign here. And so if I called this foobar, then inside of the controller, I could write foobar in the argument for the function, and it would get injected, and it would be whatever value you return here. But the nice thing about resolve is that it has to be a promise, and it will only initialize all of the views and controllers once this promise or any promises in here are resolved. And that's how you can make sure that, hey, this particular app needs some data before it will load. All other routes and views can do the exact same thing. And grab some data that you can manipulate, bootstrap it with data from an API, and kind of have everything work together.